The central theme of the Meno is virtue, or human excellence. It is worth remembering what I said in more detail in a previous lecture, that virtue has a much wider sense in Greek than it does in English. In Greek, the word arete, or virtue, extends beyond morality and can apply to anything where expertise or skill is involved. Our English word virtuoso carries some of this sense. So the question of human virtue is somewhat like asking what it would mean to be an expert at being a human being. To know this, we would have to know something essential about human nature. This is what the Meno is about. The question of virtue is formulated in two ways. First, how do I get it? And second, what exactly is it? Meno initiates the dialogue rather abruptly, challenging Socrates to explain how one comes to acquire virtue. Is it by teaching or learning? Is virtue the result of one's nature? Or does it come about through practice? Meno wants to know how to get it, how he can come to acquire virtue. Socrates responds in a way that confuses Meno. He asks if it is possible to know how to get something without knowing what it is. Socrates asks Meno, returning question with a question, what is virtue? What Socrates wants to know is what the essence of virtue is. And this we have to know before we know how to acquire virtue. Meno tries 3 times to state or define what virtue is, and each time his answer fails to stand up to Socrates' counter-questioning, what we call the Socratic method. Meno's first attempt is to explain virtue by describing what virtue is for different kinds of people, as if virtue were not the same thing for everyone. The virtue of a man, he says, is to rule in the city, helping one's friends and harming one's enemies. Basically, to do business or engage in politics. For a woman, virtue is to maintain the household and obey the husband. And likewise, there are different virtues for all the different kinds of people. We may be inclined to agree with Meno, at least in principle, that virtue is different for different people, even if we disagree with him that virtue for a woman is basically to stay in the kitchen barefoot and pregnant. Socrates says he is looking for something other than examples of virtue. He wants to know what is common to all those examples of virtue. He says he wants to know the form of virtue, its essence. Like strength in men and women, what about virtue is the same in men and women? If a man can lift 200 pounds, and a woman can lift 200 pounds, then they are equally strong. What would make men and women equally virtuous? Likewise, there are all different sorts of bees, worker bees, drones, a queen, and so on. But what is there really equal in all bees that makes them all bees? What is the essence or the form of bees? Meno takes another shot, suggesting that if Socrates wants one thing common to all, then virtue is the ability to rule over people. Virtue is a kind of power. Socrates asks in return whether he thinks it's important to rule justly. Of course, Meno says, for virtue is justice. Socrates then wonders if Meno has fallen into the same sort of trap again. He asks Meno whether justice is the only virtue, or whether there are others. But of course there are other virtues, like courage, moderation, wisdom, and so on. We have ended up with another list, when we were looking for one thing. Now Socrates wants to know what is common to courage, justice, and moderation, and so on, that makes them all virtuous. Again, he wants to know the essence or the form of virtue. And now Meno is stumped. Meno takes one last shot at defining virtue. Imitating an anonymous poet, he says that virtue is, quote, to enjoy noble things and to be capable, which Meno interprets as to desire noble things and to be able to acquire them. Again, Meno seems to think that virtue is some kind of power. The power to get what one wants. Socrates responds to Meno asking whether he thinks there is anyone who actually desires bad things. Meno thinks lots of people desire bad things. Socrates asks if these people know that these bad things will harm them. And Meno thinks that some people actually do wish to harm themselves. Socrates has a hard time accepting this, thinking that people must not really know they are really harming themselves, but must mistakenly believe that harmful things actually benefit them. Counterexamples that might occur to us are drug addicts and suicides and whoever we think is engaged in self-destructive behavior. Don't we think that a heroin addict knows, at least at some level, he is harming himself? Doesn't he know better, but just can't stop? Isn't this the nature of addiction? Likewise, doesn't someone who commits suicide realizing that ending one's own life is harmful? Isn't that the point? Socrates would disagree. He thinks that in the moment that the heroin addict is shooting up, or the person is committing suicide, at that moment they believe that it will make them in a better state, perhaps thinking mistakenly that they are escaping a greater pain by shooting up or pulling the trigger. This escape, they believe, is beneficial, when in reality it is not. From Socrates' point of view, they may think they are choosing something good, but in reality they are choosing something harmful, which is why some say this escape they believe is beneficial. From Socrates' point of view, they may think they are choosing something good, but in reality they are choosing something harmful, which is why we say some people desire bad things in the first place. Socrates' point is that they choose these things out of ignorance. So, what do you think? Do some people desire bad things knowing they are bad? Or do these people desire bad things because they mistakenly think they are good? I think this is worth discussing further on the forums. So thanks for listening, and I look forward to continuing our conversation online.